And so, and our main goal is that this is information that when you are working with providers or doing your IMIL trainings with providers, that this is information that you can use and share with providers that you're working with. So, your presenter today is Whitman, and I am a child nutrition advocate at Hunger Free Vermont. I work with child care centers, homes, shelters, and after-school programs to make sure that children are getting the nutrition they need, where they learn and play, and where they are in their day. And so I'm here to help you and to help providers provide resources and tools and technical assistance to support enrollment and implementation of food programs. And so really quickly before we get going and before we introduce Dorgan, I just want to talk about the webinar technology really quick, just so we're all on the same page. All right, and so you should see on your screen a slide that says Getting Oriented, and so that has a picture of your control panel. There is, to the left of the control panel, there's a little orange arrow. So if you're not seeing a control panel, that means that your arrow might be hidden. So if you're not seeing the control panel, you can click on the orange arrow to unhide your box, but hopefully everyone sees that. And so using the panel, there are a couple ways that you can participate in the webinar. So one way to ask questions, and I've seen a couple people have done this already, you can type a question into your question box. And so when you do that, I'll be able to see the question, and then I can relay that to Dorgan, and we can try and answer as we go along. The other way is that we are going to we're going to leave you all on unmute. So you can yourself, if you'd like, want to ask a question, you can unmute and then ask out loud, or there's yet another option. You can, to the left of your control panel, you'll see a little button that allows you to raise your hand. And if you click the raise your hand button, then I can see that you'll have a question and I can call it. Questions. We'll also have a, sorry?
Jenna?
No, it's okay. We'll also have a point midway where you'll be able to, we'll pause and make sure that the questions you may have are answered. Okay, and then the next one. And so if you have any trouble connecting or contacting us in some way, we do have tech support on hand. Jonathan is available to answer any questions. His phone number is on your screen. It's 025, and he can help you with any problems you may have. I think the first thing to try is to hang up and redial to get on the phone. But if that doesn't work, then contact him and he can help you out. He is available throughout the webinar. So I think that is all. Does anyone have any questions about the technology or having any trouble connecting?
Jenna?
Yeah?
There's still a lot of, I'm hearing a lot of background noise.
Okay. Okay, so why don't, maybe for the beginning, why don't I go ahead and mute, and then if you have a question and you'd like to ask us a question out loud and not, you can either type in the question box or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you, and then when we get to the more discussion points later, I'll go ahead and unmute everyone. Does that sound all right?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mute all. So if you want to ask the question, just either do the raise your hand button or type into the question box. All right. Great. So before we get going, just because we have such a small group joining us, we figured it would be great to hear from each of you and a little bit about your work. So I think I'll unmute each person individually and just ask you to share your name and a little bit about the work you do. And I'd also be curious to know, a little bit later on, we're going to talk about the Child and Adult Care Food Program a bit as one of the resources to address hunger and malnutrition in young children. And so I'd just like to hear a little bit about your experience with CACFP, whether you've used the program or worked with providers that are using the program. So why don't we start with Diane. Diane, you're unmuted.
Okay, you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay. I think maybe everybody knows me, but just to refresh, I am a nutrition and food specialist with the University of Vermont Extension. My office is in Middlebury. I am responsible, or I've been put in the position of being in charge of IMIL instructors in Vermont. So I had created a listserv. They have new materials, and we're just trying to pass on information when it's available to them. I also have done a lot of CACFP trainings where I train the providers on different programming. Also, as part of a midsummer camp, we work closely with CACFP for reimbursement too. So that's about it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so Amethyst, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Amethyst Peasley. I'm the resource specialist at Addison County Child Care Services, and I'm located at Mary Johnson Children's Center. And I'm also an IMIL instructor and on the Nutrition and Physical Activity Committee. And we give information. Well, every new family child care provider that comes on board gets a visit from our CACFP person and gets the program explained to them, and we provide trainings here.
Great. All right. Thank you. And then Amanda, can you hear us all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. So my name is Amanda Densmore. I'm public health.
Maybe not. Amanda, are you able to hear us?
Hello.
Oh, Amanda,
I can hear you. You're very quiet.
Very, very soft.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
We can. It's still very quiet, but I can hear you.
I'm the public health nutritionist at the Vermont Department of Health in Morrisville, and I have done child care provider in the area of nutrition as well as.
We really can't hear you. Are you talking through your computer microphone? Or are you on the telephone?
I'm a technologist called Star Wars.
Oh dear.
Oh, well, why don't we try this? Why don't you can go ahead and type to me if you want in the question box, and then I can relay, or at least we can see the work that you do and your familiarity with CACFP. So why don't we go ahead and type that, and then we'll just go ahead with the next.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, Amanda.
We just can't hear
I don't
you.
know why we can't. Okay. Hopefully you can hear us, though. Okay. Let me know if you are having a hard time hearing us. All right. So let's move on. I think Dorgan's going to take it from here.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'm Dorgan Keeney. I'm a program director here at Hunger Free Vermont. I'm also a registered dietitian and have worked here for 10 years or more now, and also done a lot of work with malnourished children and homeless families, as well as senior meal programs in the past. So I think Jenna went over what we're hoping to cover today, what hunger looks like in Vermont, the effects on children, mild malnutrition and what that looks like, and then we've added a section on sort of how food insecurity can promote obesity in children and adults. and then some of the solutions. And all of you are in positions where you're here about hunger often, I know, but we are continually surprised at how many people are unaware of hunger in Vermont, and the fact that it's for people who aren't working directly with children or low-income families, it's relatively hidden. However, we hear a lot of stories like this one. In this case, Connie Balavance, who was at the time food service director with the Hardwick schools, and would bring the summer food over to Morrisville. She says, when I brought the summer lunches to Morrisville and had a crowd of children, including some in diapers, running desperately up to me saying, "Here's the lunch lady," it changed my world. So I'm sure all of you could share similar stories. But the way we measure hunger in Vermont, as we do across the nation, is by measuring food insecurity, which is a surrogate for hunger, because hunger can be so subjective about how somebody feels. And so the U.S. Census developed a series of questions to categorize where people are in this continuum you see before you, where families go from being food secure to having severe hunger. And as they move from food security, they start to worry and stretch and juggle, and then the quality of the food diminishes and the variety of the diet. And then as they slip into more hunger in the household, the adults start to go without, and finally in severe hunger, the children are often going without. And of course, households move up and down this continuum. And when families are kind of in the middle, in this yellow area, is where we're seeing high rates of obesity among adults, and also as they miss meals. And we'll talk more about that. So what does the census find about Vermont? The latest data we have is that about 13% of all our households are food insecure, and about 22% of our children. So more than 1 in 5 of our children live in those households. And about over 12,000 kids rely on food shelves every month. So it's very common among children and more common among households with children. And as Jenna said, don't hesitate to raise your hand or type a question at any point. But even though adults try to protect children, as soon as a household slips into food insecurity, you can actually see the effects on the kids in behavior changes, in changes in health, and so we're going to talk about some of those changes. In very young children, now that we can categorize them as food insecure, you go into the household, you see poor quality diets. Yes, that's kind of obvious. More nutrient deficiencies, especially common in very young children, is iron deficiency, which, as you all know, makes that child more susceptible to lead poisoning. They absorb more lead from their environment, and that lead does more damage. So that the iron deficiency has sort of collateral effects, but also iron deficiency, we now know, if it happens in a young child, it changes the architecture of their brain. If it's severe enough to lead to anemia, when they look at those kids 10 years later, they can see that they're having more trouble with math and more trouble with reading. So iron deficiency anemia has devastating effects on young kids. We see more developmental delays, and in some studies, particularly studies that follow kids over time, we see higher rates of obesity. But as I said, on that continuum, if the family is actually in that severe category where there's simply no food in the house at all, you're going to see kids that are more underweight and poorer health. But the most sensitive measure is effects on behavior and learning with these kids. So these are the ones having trouble in school. They're acting out, more aggression, more depression, more anxiety. And just a couple of studies to illustrate this. One study showing these behavior issues in very young children and then another study showing a 70% increase in developmental delay with these kids. So not only do we have to get them access to quality food, but then we have to get early intervention in there to make up for all of the loss that this child's had. School-age children, you see much the same thing, but they're, of course, easier to measure. So poor grades, again these behavioral issues, increased grade repetition, more problems getting along with peers, social problems, and in teenagers we're seeing more suicide attempts and more suicides. And this is controlling for poverty. So we're strictly looking at food access in the home. And of course it's related to poverty, because poverty measures the money coming into the house. Food insecurity is really a measure of how much money that family has to pay for food. And I wanted to share with you this recent study that was published. They followed kids in Canada for 10 years, and they documented that when children were exposed to food insecurity, they had poorer health, as we've just talked about. And for youth, when there were repeated instances where that household fell into food insecurity, we saw more chronic health conditions like diabetes and more asthma. So really interfering with the immune system of that child. And I put this slide in to remind myself to just talk about the social aspects of food insecurity. It was really hit home for me when I was reading a paper where they had studied food insecurity in Quebec, just north of the border, and they talked very eloquently about how isolated they were because they couldn't accept dinner invitations from their friends because they couldn't reciprocate. They couldn't have their family over for holiday meals because they couldn't afford to serve what would be expected, and so they just made excuses and kind of withdrew from society. It just reminded me how much socializing we do around food. Why are children in Vermont hungry? And this is, of course, not news for any of you. But for many people, they feel like there's a safety net in place, and so if people are hungry, there must be something wrong. And so to sort of illustrate the point, I did this a couple years ago. I made up a family of 4, 2 adults that are working in the household, a young child in child care, and a school-age child. And at the time, they were making about in a minimum wage, so their income was close to $2,000 a month. And I used the reports from the state legislature, which estimates how much it costs to live in Vermont in a rural area, to meet all their expenses, and that was about $5,000 a month. And yes, this family was eligible. They took advantage of 3 squares. They got WIC. They got school meals, and they were really lucky that the child care they used part-time did provide meals, and still left families in deficit almost $2,500 a month. So, you know, a car repair or an illness and work loss can really send this family into trouble. So the hunger-obesity link, you're all working on this obesity issue, what is the evidence? The evidence is complicated where it comes to kids. With adult women, it's very clear. Almost every study has found higher rates of obesity in food insecure households for women. Some have shown men higher, but many don't show any change in men. And I read a recent paper that really looked at this issue in women, and it seemed like women without children in the house didn't really see this, but women with children very strong link with obesity. And they think part of it is that these women are going on a regular basis going without food altogether to make sure their kids have food, or, you know, feeding themselves the just very high-calorie foods and leaving the fresh fruits and vegetables and that kind of thing for their kids. The evidence for kids is spotty. as I said, if it's a longitudinal study that's following those kids over time, you do see higher rates of obesity if the food insecurity is kind of chronic and low grade. So that family, say, relying on ramen noodles or boxed macaroni and cheese for the last week of every month, and then there's a lot of reports of the first week of the next month when they get their 3 squares allotment or SNAP allotment, they're overeating because they've kind of been restrained for the last week. And this is kind of a review of the obvious. What the linkage is that inexpensive foods are high in fat and calories. Periodic hunger results in overeating when food is available, and they've actually been able to map, using GIS, access to fruits and vegetables is more limited where it is, whether it's in the inner city or in a small Vermont town. You see higher rates of obesity. And I wanted to just explore this, the effect of food insecurity on parenting and the development of eating habits in children. And studies that have really looked at this find that the causal factor of a disruption in healthy eating habits is depression in the mothers. Food insecurity is a very high risk for depression in mothers, and whether it's that you don't have enough food to feed your kids, and that's depressing. Poverty is depressing, but also depressed mothers don't often have the ability to seek that food out, to get themselves to the 3 Squares office or get themselves to the food pantry, and tend to, so their families are more food insecure. And to kind of back up and look at this development of eating habits, I thought it would be helpful to just review some of the things in the development of eating in very young children that can get disrupted when there's not enough food in the house. And to start with, as you know, we have an innate preference for salty and sweet. We're all born that way or hardwired that way. But there's some new interesting data about that what the mother eats when the baby is still in the womb has an influence on that child's preferences. So mothers who, eat a lot of garlic, their kids are more apt to accept garlic. And, the members of the cabbage family also are very strong tasting. And again, if the mother eats that and makes it part of her diet, that child's more apt to accept it. And then, they found that with kids, there's a sort of window between 4 to 6 months when kids will accept a broader array of flavors. And if they're breastfed, they're going to get exposure to those flavors through breast milk, whereas, of course, formula just tastes the same. And then we're getting into trouble between 6 and 36 months where that child is starting to exert their sense of self, and they love to say no. And I'm sure that you've all heard, as you've tried to work with young mothers, that they say, well, little Johnny said, no, I don't like that. And they accept that as given versus keep offering it. And we're all familiar with the literature about that Leon Birch did about the kids. Some kids need to taste something 20 times before they'll accept it. And if that family is routinely living on, as one mother put it to us, white food, potatoes, pasta, they're not getting that exposure. So again, food insecurity can, keep some of those fresh fruits and vegetables and lean meats. They drop out of the family's retinue of familiar foods. And then, of course, toddlers are hardwired to be neophobic. They and we, the anthropologists say that you have this newly mobile creature without a very good judgment, and so it would be very wise to have that little creature avoid new foods, and so to keep them from eating that poisonous mushroom or whatever. So toddlers are, of course, famous for not wanting to try anything new. And again, if I've certainly had parents say to me, I'm not going to buy things my kids won't eat because I can't afford to waste the money. And so I think that also narrows the scope of what families will try. Please share any thoughts or questions. I feel funny just sort of talking to this computer.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
No,
really
go
quick?
ahead.
I just wonder, I'm going to unmute everyone for a second. I'm just wondering if in your IMIL trainings and when you were trained in the IMIL, is this something that is discussed, the link between obesity and food insecurity or low-income families? Is that something that that you're familiar with?
This is Amethyst. I am familiar with it, and it's mentioned a little bit, and certainly the the addressing the individuation and the avoidance of new foods and the need to keep exposing kids to it. That's addressed.
Okay. Thanks.
Is this resonating with you, Amethyst?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have any stories you want to share?
No.
No.
Okay. All right, thank you. I was just curious to see if that was something that was a part of the IMIL trainings, or if this could maybe supplement some of what's already been discussed. All right, thanks.
I think it would be helpful. I mean, I was wondering if this information, like, is it going to be available somehow so that we can incorporate it?
Yeah, we can. I can send around a recording of this webinar, and then also, I mean, we could probably share the PowerPoint as well.
Is that what you'd like, or do you want the actual research and papers as well?
I thought the PowerPoint and the audio.
Great. Okay. Sure.
But particularly the PowerPoint. I'm actually teaching a class tomorrow night.
Oh, okay. We'll do it for you. Amanda has a question.
Oh, yes. Amanda she said that she would love to use this slide for an upcoming CACFP training on February 9th.
Perfect.
So that's great. Yeah, I will. I made a note to send out the slides right after the webinar, so I can definitely do that.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
So what? This is sort of a summary of about 3 or 4 studies that I read about how food insecurity associated with certain feeding practices that may promote overweight. And it was very interesting. One of the things that they all found was that food insecure families have shortened breastfeeding. And this is, again, controlling for poverty. So is it that just food insecure families are in such sort of desperate straits that, women are working all different jobs, and, we know all the issues with trying to work and breastfeed at the same time. Early introduction of solid food, there seems to be from these studies sort of an anxiety about making sure that when there's food that child gets it and gets it into their mouth. And so seeing things like, there's just this fear around hunger and hunger in the kids. So early introduction of solid foods, the use of appetite stimulants I thought was curious, and high-calorie supplements. Again, sort of this anxiety about is there going to be enough food, even when that child is overweight. There's this anxiety. And I just had a meeting. I gave this presentation to the early childhood mental health workers at the Howard Center, and they were just saying that they have young mothers they're working with who are themselves overweight, and their kids are overweight, and yet they pile the food onto these kids' plate and keep encouraging them to eat more. And often they know there's no food at home. And so this sort of less sensitivity to the child's feeding cues are kind of overriding it and encouraging food when that child is trying to say enough, And And the other thing that was
Do you mind if sorry.
no, go ahead.
And I had the same question that Dan did also. Could you just describe the appetite stimulants, what an appetite stimulant would be?
Yeah, there's some there's some medications that doctors give. I worked in a Failure to Thrive clinic, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, that doctors give. And in this article they talked about it, and what I don't know is whether they got something over the counter or whether this was something they got in the black market. Mm-hmm. But they did find it in many of the households. So
actually a supplement that increases the child's
appetite. Or maybe it's something that claims to, right. Increases appetite. So I thought that was very curious. And just to sort of fill you in on the latest literature about portion sizes, they found that up until about age 3, if you heap a child's plate, they will probably even eat less. But around age 3 and older, kids will eat more the more you give them. And this one study I was reading, they gave the kids double portions of the entree, and the kids ate on average 25% more, and they didn't make up for it by eating less of other components of the meal. And what was curious is that when they then went to family-style meals and had the children serving themselves, even though they'd been repeatedly exposed to these double portions, when they served themselves, they served themselves a normal portion. So it was sort of, they were saying in this paper, it was a study with Head Start providers. They said this is sort of a reason to go to family-style meals where you're allowing the children to serve themselves. And then they, of course, in the study ran into trouble with kids who were hoarding and over-serving themselves because there was no food at home. And so so then there was a discussion, which I'll get to in the next slide, about so what do we do about those children who hoard or way overeat because of anxiety about enough food at home. This slide just talks about when there's hunger in childhood. These are the things we've seen. That those kids who were hungry when they were very young are at much higher risk for obesity when they're adults. And even when that adult is relatively wealthy, so let's say they were really poor when they were young and then entered the middle class and had plenty, they still are more apt to be overweight. But if they grow up and are poor, the risk for overweight is even higher. And they've documented this really strong emotional bond to food, and using food for emotional reasons. So that and eating to the point of being uncomfortable. But that is a sort of a comfort place when there hasn't been enough food. So some studies, some qualitative literature was talking about women who remembers when they were a child and there was enough food in the house and there was they had been hungry for a while, that they would eat until they were sick to their stomach. It was uncomfortable, but that felt good. And so as adults, they would eat that much because there was still that connection to comfort with being that overfull. So this emotional bond, and as I said, the familiar foods are often high in calories because for that family, that's what they usually ate, and that's what we all go to, especially if we're unhappy, right? So, and of course, overeating when food is available is normal, I just said. So I took out a slide that maybe is worth just touching on. So and I'd love it if you all had some thoughts. If you have a child in your child care center, say, who is has very little food at home, they seem to be hoarding, really fixated on food. What can you do? And so if you have some thoughts, we'd love to hear them. Does anyone have any thoughts?
Everybody's unmuted, just so you know that we can hear you. Thank you.
This is Amethyst. I mean, that question does come up in trainings, and I would love help from you with an answer.
Okay, I'll do my best, but I want some help from all of you too, because I know that you're experts on this as well. But I mean, I think one of the things is trying to, if a child, you've given them a portion, and part of it, of course, is if you're working with the parents too. I think parents often need education about what is a normal portion for this age, because they may have may not realize that, particularly when children get to be toddlers, their growth rate is slowing, and so for their size as an infant. So it's helpful to just talk about normal portion sizes. But the other thing for a child is to try to help them reconnect their feelings of satiety, help them reconnect with their own bodies about when they're full. So, you know, if they want a second helping, sort of ask them to wait a minute and really think about whether they're full or they're really hungry before they get a second helping. I think, you know, for children who are frantic about food and just, you know, just eating and not paying attention to anything else because the food is the most important, you know, trying to redirect them with conversation and get them engaged socially, so take some of that fixation away from the food itself. You know, I think things I'm sure you do, which is just reassure them that there is food, there will always be food. And then, of course, if they've had two portions of the entree or the starch or the meat or meat alternate, then that's enough, and then they can have all of the fruits and vegetables they want to eat. You know, those are the things that come to mind, and I would love it if you have other thoughts about dealing with this situation. Is that helpful at all, Amethyst?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Shall we go on?
Yes.
Okay. So awkward to be on the phone. Hard not to be in person. Okay. So if a child's exposed to food insecurity over time, they will become malnourished. There's no question about that. And I know Amanda has seen this little boy, but this is a child who was in the clinic where I worked. I worked in a clinic for starving kids in Boston, and he is starving, and yet, you know, I think we'd all walk right by him on the street and not look twice. And so I think it's instructive to see what mild malnutrition looks like in kids, but if you saw him next to a well-nourished age peer, it would be really obvious. So Amanda knows the answer to this, but if Amethyst or Diane, you want to tell me how old you think this little boy is?
2.
See, I would say 2.
2, yeah. Well, he's 2.5. He's the size of a 1.5-year-old, and developmentally, he's about a year. You know, he's just pulling to stand. Got a couple of words, so he's quite delayed. And yet, I know there's pediatricians in Vermont that would say, "It looks fine to me." You know. And so what happens to kids when they're not getting enough food? And here I'm talking about total protein calorie undernutrition. You know, I'm not going to go into any of the micronutrient deficiencies and those effects. Just talking about total protein calorie malnutrition. And the first thing that happens to kids before any changes in weight gain or growth is that they reduce their activity. They don't move around as much. They don't interact as much. It's really obvious in babies. Have any of you worked with a malnourished child and seen this kind of thing?
No.
No. Yeah. It's really obvious in babies, because they're not looking at you, they're not babbling. They're really, it's almost like they're conserving their energy. But, of course, this is the way kids learn. They explore. They find the old crow, and they clean out the cupboards, and they make a mess. And we know from the, we have these new methods of being able to measure brain development that's non-invasive. And so they've been able to see that in the last weeks of pregnancy and the first weeks of life, there's incredible multiplication of brain cells and synapses, the connection between brain cells. At its peak, we're making 7,000 synapses a second. Unbelievable what's happening in the brain. And then there's a pruning process. Those pathways that don't get used or they don't get strengthened, and then pathways that aren't used get pruned away. And so what I'm saying is that the experience of this young child who is not experiencing things as much, it will change the structure, the actual architecture of their brain. And for those of us who are old enough to remember that when they opened up the orphanages in Romania, this was illustrated really profoundly. These kids who had been in cribs until they were age 5 and did not have much social interaction. And there's some elasticity. They were able to make up some, but for many of them, they were profoundly delayed. And then the other early effect is the immune system really falls apart. So these are the kids who you see who always have what's going around. They always have a runny nose, one ear infection after another, and it can set up this infection malnutrition cycle because what happens to kids who are sick? First thing you notice is that they don't eat. And the infection burns calories, and if there's vomiting and diarrhea, you're losing nutrients. And so the next infection will be more prolonged and more extreme unless you can really get that child to feed them a lot when they're well, and they can make up for it unless the family does not have enough to eat in the house. And I'm sure you've worked with these kinds of kids, and kids will eat a lot when they're better if the food's available. And I've worked with families who I've said, okay, Timmy is better, he's well, he's hungry, a meal every 2 hours. And they just look at me like I'm crazy. We don't have that kind of food in the house. So as part of it, as a clinician in that clinic, my job was to bring food to people's households whenever I went, so to try to break this cycle. And then kids start to lose weight or slow their weight gain, which if goes on for any length of time, their growth becomes stunted, and they almost grow to meet the calories that they're taking in. And all of these kids, of course, are from the Failure to Thrive clinic where I worked. And they'll be thin, but they're not glaringly thin. They don't have the swollen bellies of famine that many people expect. So to kind of summarize, in mild malnutrition, well, if it's acute, the children will be thin. But if it's chronic, low grade, then their linear growth is slowed, and they can be proportional. A little thin, but on the weight to height growth chart. And what's really sinister is that brain development mirrors linear growth. So if you're working with a kid and who's failing to thrive or becoming malnourished, the typical scenario is you'll see them start to fall off the weight growth chart, followed by their linear growth will become slowed, and then their head circumference will become slowed. That's the classic case, and of course, children don't always follow that classic example. To kind of summarize where we come in the last bit, the most striking effects are on behavior with kids. is reduced activity and apathy, delayed language, cognitive and motor development, higher rates of infection, and growth deficits are all sort of a package with mild malnutrition. And I wanted to share this. This is the most amazing study, I think, where they followed boys who had growth failure due to malnutrition in the first years of life. They followed them for 50 years and found that when they reached age 50, they had attained less education and made less money than controlled, than controls who had all the similar attributes but had not been malnourished. So it does follow you for a lifetime. And it's estimated that hunger costs Vermont about $200 million a year in health costs, in education costs, and in lost work potential. And we might even argue correction costs. We know that when kids drop out of high school, they're much more apt to end up in jail. And there's this cycle of poverty and malnutrition where malnutrition leads to, all the things we talked about, learning deficits, behavior problems, more illness, leading to school failure. You're excluded from the knowledge economy. You live in poverty. That puts you at risk for malnutrition. And our organization is dedicated to breaking the cycle.
Okay, so I just put a slide in here. I just wanted to make sure we took a moment to check in and see if anybody had any questions at this point. I think we're going to move into the next section of our webinar, which is talking about solutions and resources. So I just want to see if anyone has any questions about what Dorgan has been sharing with us.
No? Okay.
All right.
You can always send us emails or questions later.
Right.
Or
type in the question box, too.
Or type
I like the question box.
So what can we do? Jenna sent you, hopefully, this food and nutrition screening algorithm that I developed as sort of an offshoot of work that we've been doing here in Chittenden County. There's been a task force meeting for almost 10 years where we've been trying to bring additional services to families that have a malnourished child. And sitting on this task force is the United Way, the Health Department, DCF, early intervention, and the VNA, and we've been giving these families more social work support and more dietitian support and more and food cards and trying to make sure they're getting all their benefits. But one of the things that we learned from the early childhood malnutrition group is that when a child has complicated health issues and there's complications in the home, that often food and nutrition fall by the wayside. And we've come in our little group. For example, we had a 3-year-old who weighed 20 pounds, and he had every provider you can imagine working with him and his mother. And he had every medical test in the book, and but he was starving, and nobody was addressing food access in that home, and no one was really addressing his own nutritional needs, and he was documented as being malnourished. So it was kind of and we saw this time and time again, where there'll be, and in rural areas, I think it's even more extreme. I was a CSHN nutritionist, and I would be going into homes where they had a PT for the last 2 years, or an OT, or a speech therapist, and it was clear that food access was a huge issue for this family, and that the child couldn't take advantage of these therapies if they weren't being fed. So this algorithm is a way for us to sort of almost deputize all health education and social service providers to ask about food access. So the way this algorithm is set up is in the upper left corner are kind of the high-risk environmental issues that put a family at risk. So poverty, that's obvious. Single-parent household related to poverty. If the parent or caregiver is depressed or has other mental health issues, a huge red flag for food insecurity. Social isolation, a child with special health needs, very high risk for hunger in those households. And of course, high heating or utility costs and housing costs. And then the lower left are the things I think of as that the child brings to the equation. So these are either risk factors for the child becoming malnourished or signs that they already are. So delayed growth, if they're overweight, if they're anemic, if they're underweight, vomiting and reflux, extreme pickiness, if the feeding relationship is dysfunctional, where, either withholding food or overfeeding, if the child is really delayed in their acceptance of textures, obviously chronic constipation, dental caries, and if a child is grazing on the bottle, after a certain age, all risk factors for malnutrition. And then on the right is sort of things that we want providers to do. In the top box, we want, no matter what, share information with every family you work with, give them a 2-on-1 as a resource and information on 3 squares. And then, if there are these risk factors, check back and see if they're getting these benefits. And on the back of the algorithm, I give people some language to how to talk about food insecurity. Rather than, for example, rather than asking if you don't have enough money to feed your kids, ask if they would like information about food resources, and ways to work it into the conversation. So I just wanted to give you this resource. I've been presenting this to the community health teams and to the different family service offices around the state, and to try to get it out and used by people. And I've gotten good feedback that it's useful. It's people feel like they maybe could ask about this, and they'd never occurred to them before that they should give information about 3 squares to families.
Do we want to mention the hunger course?
Oh yeah,
as well, because I did send. I hope you all received an email. I sent a list. The handouts were attached to the email, and there was also a link to the hunger course there. I don't know if you want to mention.
Yeah. So last year we rolled out a online hunger course that's accredited for doctors and nurses and other health and educational providers. It takes about an hour. It's self-directed. You can come and go on the course. It's built as slides with voiceover and then embedded videos. And then at the end there's a quiz you can take, and if you pass the quiz you get a certificate that you can use for any kind of continuing education that's required for social workers or OTs or that kind of thing. So, and we're the one that we have is geared towards medical providers. It's very Vermont-centric. It's about childhood hunger in Vermont. So I encourage you to share it with people you think might get something out of it. We also, our plan is in 2013 to redo it with more of a service provider educational focus and less medically focused. And then we hope to do one on senior hunger a couple years from now. So that's our plan. So the things that we see as solutions to hunger in Vermont are, and ask everyone to provide information on wage support and food nutrition programs. And by wage support, I mean we mean things like the child tax credit or the earned income tax credit. Of course, subsidy for child care. You're probably all aware of the big wrestling match going on right now between the earned income tax credit and child care subsidy. Assistance with applications and referrals. We really hope to have people get some help with that as they've cut back on the state level with for case managers, I think people are expected to do things online without help, and that can be an issue for some families. And then helping people overcome the stigma of assistance. I think one of the things we've heard from the community, and Amanda, you brought this up at the Hunger Council, is that people feel shamed about taking advantage of benefits that they may be eligible for. I think the presidential election really brought out, all the negative things people feel about anyone who's on food stamps or accepting WIC. And so I always say to people, that money is sitting in Washington, and if you sign up for this program, you're going to bring it to Vermont. Mm-hmm. That sometimes gets people to sign up. Just a review of some of the programs available. Old hat for all of you, 3 Squares WIC senior meals. We're certainly hearing about a lot more children who are being placed in kinship care, and those families are often hungry because there's just, there isn't money that's following those kids, and those seniors are living on a fixed income. And of course the FNEP program, run out of UVM Extension, is a wonderful resource, and charitable food. The best way to find out about charitable food in your region is through 211. They have the most up-to-date.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. So Amanda was asking if you could explain the struggle between the Earned Income Tax Credit and the child care subsidy.
Oh, sure. Happy to, Amanda. So last week the governor gave his State of the States address, and he focused the whole speech. I had the privilege of being there, and he focused the whole speech on education and made some interesting proposals. And one of his proposals was to increase the child care subsidy and also provide one-time funding for communities that don't have early childhood programs. And he would support this initiative with $17 million that he's going to take out of the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit. And I think all of us, cheer about funding, giving people more subsidy and providing universal preschool. I think myself and many others are very concerned about decreasing the Vermont Earned Income Tax Credit, which is now funded at $24 million, or $25 million. So $17 million would decimate that program, and the Earned Income Tax Credit is a tax credit for low-income families who have children who are working predominantly. So these are the working families who are not making enough money to meet their needs, and so does that explain it? And the other thing that he mentioned, which is near and dear to our hearts, and we've worked for many years and to make it happen, and the governor heard us and has also including in his speech that the administration is putting money in the budget so that school-age children who are now having to pay 40 cents for lunch because they're eligible only for the reduced price meal category, they will now get free lunch. They get free breakfast. A few years ago, we convinced the legislature to pay the 30 cents for those kids for breakfast. This would make lunch free for them. So this would mean for families up to 185% of poverty, their children get free school meals. And school meal programs all across the state have told us this is the category of children who are often missing meals because they don't have the 40 cents. So we're thrilled about that. But I hope that explained it. Not too long-winded. I wanted to share with you these other financial resources. We just talked about the Earned Income Tax Credit and, of course, LIHEAP. LIHEAP is the Low-Income Energy Assistance Program, and you keep hearing probably on the federal level, the federal government is giving less and less money to support this program, and so, but if you get LIHEAP, even if it's only $1 in LIHEAP or a tiny amount of money, you get you'll end up with more 3 Squares Vermont, your higher 3 Squares Vermont benefits. So encourage people to apply even if it's a small amount. And then for those who have working with families in the Green Mountain Power catchment area, I wanted to make sure that you knew about this because it's kind of time sensitive. The Green Mountain Power has instituted a sliding scale for low-income people where they would get they'd get a discounted rate, and there's a one-time forgiveness of debt if they apply between December 15th last month and March 15th. So for those of you in Green Mountain Power's discount area, if you want something written about this, just let me know and I'll send it to you in writing. And of course, then the nutrition programs that feed children where they are in their day, school meals, summer meals, child care meals, after-school snacks, and suppers. And I hope you're all aware that in communities that have more than 50% free and reduced price kids in their schools, those communities can do the at-risk supper program. Jen has been working hard to get the word out. And just in case we get discouraged and think, well, school meals or child care meals are not going to make a big difference in a hungry household, I wanted to share this study with you that was written up in Pediatrics a couple of years ago, where in Quebec they studied 2,000 adolescents, and in Quebec they don't have, most schools at the time did not have breakfast and lunch, so they randomly put breakfast and lunch in the high schools, and they found that with those 10 meals a week, they were able to close the achievement gap between food-insecure kids and food-secure kids. And so with just 10 meals a week, it's incredible. So it's worth doing, even if it doesn't seem like much. Now I'm going to turn this over to Jenna to just talk about what we know about the Child and Adult Care Food Program.
All right. Thank you. And I was just answering, Amethyst just typed in a question saying that she would love to see written info on the Green Mountain Power.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to make a note really quick to send in the GMP discount.
Yep.
So I can send that out to everybody with the PowerPoint slide after the webinar. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about CACFP. I get the sense that everyone on this call has a lot of experience with CACFP already, and I see, Amanda, you sent in your description that you also do CACFP trainings. And so I won't go into a lot of detail about the program. I think a lot of you know the details of the program already, but I will talk a little bit about more detail on the benefits of the program and how maybe you can help us spread the word about how beneficial the program can be for children and for child care providers. So I just want to mention really quick the handouts that I sent in the email before the webinar. So one of those is a general kind of information sheet on CACFP, and particularly in centers. And I have more of those that I can provide to any of you to kind of give out to providers. It's a good tool to show them the benefits of the program and how it works, kind of an overview. And I also have those available for daycare home providers that I can send out. The other thing I sent in the email is the brand new CACFP handbook. So this was put out by the USDA, the agency that administers the program. And this is a brand new handbook for 2013. And I got a chance to briefly look through it, and it's a really great resource that you can share with providers that you're training. There's a lot of information on meal planning and shopping for food and food preparation and food safety tools. And what's neat about this handbook is that it also addresses physical activity and has some ideas for active play and some good activity examples. It also discusses written policies and practices for child care providers to use in their centers to kind of develop a more holistic wellness policy. So I think it's a really great tool and a good resource to share, especially with providers that are already using CACFP that maybe want to improve what they're already doing. So Dorgan talked about the federal nutrition programs and kind of how beneficial it can be for young children to bring meals to where they are in their day. And it can really be a good safety net for families. And it can improve nutrition for young children, reduce hunger and food insecurity, and also can be a tool to help fight obesity in early childhood. So let's skip over, this is a video about CACFP, but I think you're all very familiar with how the program works in centers. So I'll just go through some benefits of the program. I think we've all, in our work with CACFP, we've all heard the challenges that providers can encounter when enrolling in the program. There's a lot of barriers in Vermont to participation, so it can be good to remind ourselves of the benefits of the program and to share them with providers when we're working with them. And so for children that participate in CACFP and childcare, we see that they're consuming more key nutrients and fewer fats and sweets, so their nutrition is improving. Also, and this is something I hear a lot from providers in CACFP, picky eaters tend to be more likely to try new foods. They see that a child that came into their program only eating, peanut butter sandwiches every day is now trying broccoli, and part of that is because they're sitting down to family-style meals with their peers and with the staff from the center, and they're seeing healthy eating habits modeled for them. And so picky eaters are trying more foods and also developing motor skills and social skills and learning healthy choices for their whole life by sharing meals together. So yeah, we can go. And so also, we hear a lot of providers can feel that the process is cumbersome, but it really can yield a lot of positive benefits for the providers themselves. First and foremost, it is a funding source for their meal program. It's bringing federal dollars into the program that they can use to support their meal program. Also, they're able to get training and materials from the Department of Education and can access resources that they can then share with their staff when they do staff trainings, and also share with the parents of the children in their centers. So it can, and also another key benefit to providers is that a lot of studies show that children that have consistent access to nutritious foods also have an improvement in behavior and their ability to focus and learn. And so that can be a benefit to providers as well. And then also, of course, families are able to benefit from CACFP. So families that may be struggling to live on a really tight food budget are able to see some relief in that budget. They don't need to pack snacks and meals. Many centers now do breakfast and lunch. Some even do supper. And so they're able to see some relief on their food budget, and also just know that they're sending their kid off to daycare or preschool, and the child is receiving nutritious meals that meet those federal guidelines. And so some comfort to the parents as they send them away for the day. They're getting the nutritious meals that they need. And then lastly, there is a lot of benefit to Vermont, to the state. So in 2012, when child care providers submit their claims, the Department of Education is reimbursing them, but that is federal money. And so in 2012, over $4.5 million came from the federal government in CACFP reimbursements, and that money, of course, goes directly back to employees and grocery stores and the Vermont economy. And I know Amethyst down in Middlebury is doing some work with farm to preschool, so also some potentially money going back to Vermont farmers, which is a really neat project. All right. And so I want to share with you some research. So I think those are some benefits that we're all probably familiar with those benefits, but there has been research that has demonstrated those benefits, especially in terms of improved nutrition. So this slide you're seeing on your screen now is a summary of 3 studies that were conducted on the how children's nutrition was impacted by CACFP, and the studies found that when children had meals in childcare that met CACFP requirements, they had increased access to healthy foods, they had increased milk consumption, increased vegetable consumption, and also were consuming less sugary food and beverages, and also their risk of becoming overweight had decreased. And what was particularly interesting was one study saw that this effect was particularly strong for low-income children. So really seeing a significant benefit for low-income children participating in the program. And because children are receiving better nutrition, we see that that improves health and educational outcomes for young children. And so based on, this is a Children's Health Watch policy brief from 2010, they found that children receiving meals in childcare were less likely to be in poor health, less likely to become ill or hospitalized, and much more likely to have a healthy weight and height for their age. And so because we're seeing improved nutrition, and because improved nutrition leads to these positive health and educational outcomes, we can deduce based on school meal data that Dorgan talked about a little bit earlier and anecdotal evidence. So children who are consuming regular nutritious meals when they're in care are seeing improved learning, improved brain and cognitive development. We talked a little bit about improved behavior already. And because of this, because of the positive impact on development and learning, young children are more ready for school and to begin learning in a school environment. And in addition to that, because of the family-style meals we talked about, they're more likely to develop eating habits that will last a lifetime. Clicking to the next, sorry. And so this is, oh, can we click back a slide? Oh, sorry. No, it's fine. And so this is, I just wanted to, the reason that I'm sharing all of this with you is that we do need your help and the help of people who are interacting with child care providers to help us increase access to this program. So right now, participation in CACFP in Vermont is very low. We're ranked 49th for participation in this program. In centers, right, yeah. So in center participation, we're ranked 49th in the country. Right now, 23% of centers in Vermont participate in CACFP. So that's about 150 centers out of about 650 centers in the state. And then for homes, we have about 54% participation. So participation is better in homes, but in centers we're experiencing relatively low participation. And so because of all the benefits of enrolling in the program for both providers and for children, our work here at Hunger Free Vermont really focuses on increasing access to this program and expanding the use of CACFP in Vermont. And we really look to providers and trainers to help us spread the word about the program. We can go to this. And so I don't know, so we have 10 minutes left. Do we want to talk about this, or do we want to move on to another discussion question?
I can't remember what it is.
So we were just asking about kind of applying this to the IMIL training.
Well, we can see if people.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just open it up to? I know that you all work with providers often and do CACFP training, and I'm just wondering what your experience is with CACFP, whether you kind of routinely discuss it with providers, and what you think some of the barriers might be to participation in Vermont.
This is Amethyst. And you've probably heard this before. In terms of center-based programs, I mean, the big barrier is that they don't have kitchens.
Right, right. Mm-hmm.
And so, so coming up with the money to install whatever they would need to install to, be up to code and be able to provide meals, I think that's a big barrier.
Okay.
So how many people, how many kids are in most centers? Are they small to large?
In centers that participate in the program?
Any center, because I'm surprised they don't have kitchens.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, for instance, Otter Creek here in Middlebury,
Mm-hmm.
I think would love, I mean, they participate for snacks, like for breakfast and afternoon snack, but
Mm-hmm.
they just don't have a big enough kitchen to provide lunch.
And it couldn't come over from your center. It couldn't be transported over?
I don't think so, but maybe there is, but maybe it could come from somewhere else. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, so one thing, and I was going to mention this, I think that a lot of centers kind of, that is kind of, it can be a reaction is, I don't have the resources, I don't have the kitchen facilities, and there are some models that have worked really well to address that up in the Chittenden County area. Child Care Resource has actually become a sponsor for centers. So some of those smaller centers that don't have the kitchen facilities or the resources to run the program, I don't know if you're familiar with kind of how homes participate in the program, but they participate through a sponsor. So the sponsor is filing a lot of the paperwork and the application process, and the homes are just kind of reporting meals and sometimes vending meals from other sources. And so in Chittenden County, the Child Care Resource has actually been able to sponsor centers that may not be able to run the program on their own. That's one model. And another is that some centers will actually kind of vend meals from another source. For example, centers that are associated with a public school, they might actually do meals through the school food service. It's actually pretty easy for a school food service to claim meals for a preschool that's associated with the school. And then other programs, a really great program up here in Chittenden County is the Vermont Works for Women has a kitchen program where they are vending meals to child care centers that are enrolled in CACFP, and at the same time they're training women to do to work in the kitchen and to do the cooking and production of the meals. So it's kind of a neat program. So I guess what I'm saying is there are kind of solutions and models. So when we hear from providers that kind of barrier, it's great to, you can connect them with me or with the Department of Education with the child nutrition programs, and we might be able to find a way around some of those barriers. Any other thoughts on CACFP barriers that might come up when you discuss the program with providers?
And of course, Jen is a resource.
Right. Yeah. You can. If you are discussing CACFP with a provider, you can always direct them to me. The handout that I gave you in your email has my contact information on it, and it'll be on the email that I send to you all. And you can always direct people my way to answer any questions or brainstorm ideas to address any barriers or concerns.
Do you have a handout that shows like what the financial benefits are?
I don't have a handout, but I can create one, and I have an online tool. So I have a form that a provider can go on and they can fill out their kind of, because it's so unique to each center and home. so they can, and then I can generate for them an idea of what the reimbursement would be that they'd be receiving. So I can send the link to that form.
Okay.
Well, unless, Jorgen, do you know if we have any other kind of handout on general? Yeah, I can send the reimbursement form.
Okay.
Do people who are enrolled in CFP feel that there's too much paperwork involved?
Center providers often do. Homes, not so much.
Okay.
Yeah, we do hear that from homes here.
You do it
Really?
here from homes too? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do these homes have access to Minute Menu? Sometimes some of the sponsors have different computer programs that make it harder or easier to fill out the paperwork.
Yeah.
There's a on the federal side at the USDA, there's a task force that's been working on streamlining the paperwork in this program for, I don't know, 10 years. We remain hopeful. But there was unfortunately some fraud 20 years ago in this program, and they responded by just putting on the program more paperwork than is true in school meal programs. I mean, it's just incredible. But providers who are well organized and have a lot of it, they use the computer to great effect. You know, for example, they'll have the recipes computerized, and so when they have to keep production records, they can, figure out how many kids they fed and they keep their recipes on a computer. It's pretty fast. You know, providers tell us the paperwork is 5 to 10 minutes a day. So it really depends on the person and the systems they have in place.
Yeah, and I would say that's another thing that, if a provider is having trouble with the paperwork, again, you can always get in touch with us, and we could, I have a couple people in mind that I could ask for ideas that have done really well with the paperwork and kind of have a really great system that they use. And then also they can always get in touch with Karen at the Department of Ed that could suggest some ideas that might work better to kind of streamline the process. I'm seeing a question. Okay, Amanda is asking what kind of funds are there for supporting Minute Menu for participants to help with paperwork.
Amanda, I think Scott got it for Lamoille Family Center.
Yeah, I think they have.
They have Minute Menu now. There aren't any funds that we know of for child care. We used to give out grants, but no longer have access to that money. So we would probably do the same things you would, which would be to go to try for a grant from a foundation or a local business or a fraternal organization.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and when I'm not sure about the other Building Bright Futures regional councils, but I know in Chittenden they have a grant program, and I think that would be a great proposal for it's like small grants that the Building Bright Futures Chittenden Council decides on, and so that might be a good place to look at maybe the regional groups.
Or the United Way, maybe. Right. Yeah.
All right, so we're just about running out of time, so maybe what I'll quickly do is I'll just run through a little summary really quick, and then we'll give you some contact information. And so just to summarize the last little bit, as we've both kind of talked about, nutritional well-being is really important to the development and growth of a young child. So it's important that providers are always considering food resources with every family that they're working with. And Dorgan provided some great tools on how providers can talk to families about food insecurity and also the resources they can provide to them. In addition to the handouts we already sent, we can also always send the 3 Squares RAT cards and the 2-on-1 cards and 3 squares posters that providers can offer to families. And as trainers, you are all in a unique position to get these resources to providers and this information to providers to help them assist families in reducing hunger. And then the last point is just that I think we all recognize the benefits of CACFP and how much bringing nutritious meals into a child care setting can support providers and children and families. And so we're hoping that you all can help us spread the word about CACFP and kind of turn the message around to really recognizing the benefits of the program. And so I think the next slide was a discussion, and maybe we can skip to the last. So thank you very much for attending and for participating in the webinar. As we said, get in touch with us anytime you have any questions or would like more resources, and I will be sure to send out, I'm going to send out the link to that CACFP reimbursement form, and then also the link to the hunger course we talked about, and I'll send the recording and PowerPoint from the webinar, and also some resources on that Green Mountain Power discount. And feel free to email myself or Dorgan with any other resources you might need or questions you might have. And the last thing I just want to mention is that you'll see a link on your screen here. There is a SurveyMonkey link just for a brief evaluation of the webinar, and I'll also include that in the follow-up email with the recording. So any feedback you might have, we'd appreciate it. And feel free to share this webinar with any of your colleagues and any providers that you work with. We'd love to get the word out about these resources. Do you have anything else?
No, just to thank you all, and please do fill out the evaluation.
Well, thank you very much for providing this to our special little group here.
Oh, can you, all right. Hey, Jenna, could you email that SurveyMonkey link, because you can't, like, click on it or copy it off of the...
Oh, absolutely. I will include that in the email.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
thank you. All right. Thanks a lot. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.